Welcome back to another week of More Grace. And I kind of like to surprise our listeners. They never know who's going to be on the podcast. And this week, it's just me and Brian. So we're giving Matt the week off. Still talking about James. And it's a good one. This week we talked.
This is probably going to be your favorite week, right, Amber?
Absolutely. That's okay. So we talked about the tongue. We're in chapter 3. And all about taming the tongue. And I'll be honest, I actually am not looking forward to this topic at all. There's something, a little feeling in my heart or maybe in my tummy that like, why don't I want to get into this topic, Brian?
You feel convicted?
Is that what that feeling is?
Could be. Could be.
Did you feel convicted when you were like preparing for the message?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, especially when
It's not
because
just me?
No, because it opens up with, let not many of you become teachers, my brother, knowing that as such you will incur a stricter judgment.
That's a great point. Yeah, I want to. I'm not a teacher. I just want to go ahead and put that out there right now. So not licensed. I'm just a regular person. You are the teacher.
No, we consider you a teacher, so you're in on this too, Amber. Sorry.
Oof. Okay, I am nervous because I think, okay, what if my heart needs to change in this matter? I talk a lot, Brian. I'm not a woman of few words. And so this does say those who talk a lot will have a stricter judgment. So that does concern me. And we're just thought maybe this would be good for our listeners too, who have a lot of...
Not just for teachers, Amber, but as Jesus said in Matthew 12, by your words you'll be justified, by your words you'll be condemned. And Proverbs doesn't just speak to teachers, but to every human that uses words. So, we have to extrapolate the principles. He starts with teachers, but he's clearly addressing his entire audience, which now includes us.
It now includes us. Okay, well, since it includes us, it includes me. I'm just going to get this out of the way. Sometimes unwholesome words come out of my mouth. I can be a little bit sweary. I'm not going to let my kids listen to this episode. Can I still say bad words with a pure heart? Like, is that a thing?
Well, a couple thoughts, Amber. It's interesting how we're deeply personalizing this podcast. I don't know your heart, Amber.
Okay.
So I don't know your heart. I'm not going to ask you to say which words because you might say them, and I don't want that on the podcast.
We'll bleep them out. It's fine.
But I can't recall a time where I said an unwholesome word and there was something good in my heart. So no, I mean, I think Jesus is spot on. Obviously, he taught a lot of truth, but out of the heart, the mouth speaks.
There is so much in this passage about the tongue, good uses, bad uses, and I was kind of thinking about it like, here it just says the tongue. You mentioned a lot in your sermon, the tongue and the thumb, texting, emailing, all the different ways to communicate. I just thought, is the ability to communicate just one of the most powerful tools that God gave humanity?
Absolutely. I think so. I think it is one of the greatest gifts that he's given us. And it is powerful. So, as I mentioned on Sunday, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Not just death, but also life. The tongue, our speech, our words, we communicate in a way as beings made in the image of God that no other creatures do. God gave that to us. God communicates. He allows us to communicate. It's part of us reflecting his image, and it's part of us reflecting the ability to affect our world through our speech. And so, I think it's absolutely one of our greatest gifts. As a result, that's why we have such a stewardship, a responsibility. So when he says, teachers are going to incur a stricter judgment, it's not just because they use more words, it's because of the level of authority of their words. And I would argue that actually does apply to all Christians, maybe to teachers in the church in this context, and they have more authority within the church, and when they speak, people are listening more intently. That's certainly true. But it is true of all of us that our speech, our words are a stewardship from God, this beautiful gift. Are you stewarding it well? And so, we need to shift, where you started, maybe kind of shift the conversation from what words can I get away with? How low can I set the bar, in a sense, to how high can I set the bar, and how can I effectively, let's turn the corner and let's talk positively. How can I positively use my speech as God intended me to use it? And if I am using it positively, in a sense, that just creates less space for me to use it negatively.
That's really good. We talk about, so how to use it positively. I think also about our speech and our communication. It really does, Brian, peels back the curtain to our hearts. And you already mentioned Matthew, 12:34? Is that right? I remember it because it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And this is kind of where I was going when you were talking to me about my negative words.
Not about your negative words, just negative words in general.
Okay,
Amber,
but
so.
if they're being used a lot, is that not somewhere in my heart? And so I just think like that does help me appropriate. I think really where I'm going with this.
So like the lights on the dashboard, the word pops. In my old Jeep, there was only one light, and it was engine. It didn't tell you anything specific, but it just told you something's out of whack. And so when the word flies, that's a moment. You ask God, search my heart. What's going on inside of me that would allow that to happen, and not pretend there's nothing transpiring in my heart. And often what we're going to find is an anger that's rooted in a fear, that's rooted in a distrust or a disappointment. What has God provided, given?
Right.
I've got to grasp. There's something going on there, and it's worth exploring.
Yeah, well, and there's a passage or a verse in this passage that talks about, man can tame every beast on the earth, but not his tongue. That's real. I was thinking like, okay, we can tame lions, and I can't tame my speech.
But I think one of the reasons for that, in a sense, if I can extrapolate on the metaphor, is the lion is an obvious enemy, and sometimes we don't understand that the tongue is an enemy. It's a less obvious enemy. We're just so used to using it all the time that we forget how deceptive and destructive it can be. You see a lion, man, I got an enemy right there. It's just really obvious. But you have this, it's the traitor within. It's because, again, the heart, or our flesh, the bent part of our heart, is a traitor promising us that, I'll do better, I can, and then undermining what we really want to become. And so I think sometimes we just forget, we just take our eye off the ball, that our tongue is a subversive internal enemy.
That's great. So taking our eye off the ball isn't even necessarily the words I'm using. Like, the ball is the Lord. And so am I focused? Because I just even think like, okay, tame the tongue, say great things, just encourage people. Don't, let me perfect this tool that I have. But really the method to perfecting, which is what we talked about just week after week here, is our trust, growth, maturity, dependence on the Lord.
Yeah.
So
the ball is our maturity in the Lord. To use James' word that he introduces in chapter 1, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That is, that you can be whole. The image of Christ can be fully formed in you. You can be mature, teleos. That is really, in a sense, that's the goal of every writer of every epistle. He wants the readers to become mature. It's really obvious in James, but the reason that these people wrote to the church is so that we would become more like Jesus. So that's the ball, that's the goal, because as I'm becoming more like Jesus, my speech is going to be transformed.
Right. Yeah. And we've talked about, just week after week, just different aspects of that. And this is such a big deal. A whole passage is devoted to it. And so that really, just 2 weeks ago, I think we talked about partiality. Last week, we talked about just our actions and what are we doing. This week, we're talking about our speech. This passage does kind of transition, tongue, tame your tongue. And then it just goes into wisdom. And I'm curious, Brian, like, are we talking about two different things, or are they related?
No, I think they're connected. Here's what I think James is saying. So the transition you're talking about happens in verse 13, where James moves from the tongue specifically, and then he says, "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom." So I think he's coming back to that let not many of you become teachers. So who among you is wise and understanding? Okay, you think you're ready to be a teacher. You think you're wise and understanding. You think you have something to say. Well, it's going to be, needs to be reflected in your life, or let him show by his good behavior, his deeds, and the gentleness of wisdom. Because if your heart is dark, then your words are going to be dark. If you're listening to earthly wisdom, you're guided by earthly wisdom, you think you're wise and understanding, well, it's going to be reflected in your life, and it's ultimately going to be reflected in your words. So if you want to be one who uses words well, you have to be drawing on the wisdom of God. You've got to be embedded in the wisdom of God. And what's interesting in this passage, and I didn't have a lot of time to deal with it in the sermon, but he borrows a lot of the vocabulary from the very beginning of the book. So, when he says this wisdom is not that which comes from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. The word for natural there is soulish. And remember, he says, don't be double-minded, or literally don't be double-souled, right? There are, in a sense, a split soul that is, I want my way, I want God's way. And he says, this is soulish, that is your way. It's man's way. And then he uses, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exists, there's disorder, there's instability. That's a word also that Paul uses to talk about the Corinthian church. There's disorder, there's instability. The wisdom above is first pure, peaceable. Then he says it's unwavering. When he tells us in chapter 1, ask for God's wisdom without any doubting. That word for doubting is from the same root as unwavering. It's undoubting, okay? Yeah. Meaning it's not, again, split, not doubting that God can give wisdom or good, but am I going to actually implement God's wisdom, or am I going to listen to what God has to say and then decide what I want to say? Well, the wisdom from above is unwavering, it's undoubting, it's all in.
Yeah. You said something yesterday, and I wrote it down, speaking on behalf of God. I've woven wisdom through the entire universe, and my way is going to work. That was really good. This morning, in my own time in the Bible, I was reading Exodus 14. So Israel is escaping, and they are going through the Red Sea. And I was thinking about this, like this doubting, this wavering. And so here I am, if I'm an Israelite fleeing from Egypt, I have this choice where, one, it looks like I'm about to perish. And I know I'm supposed to follow this pillar of fire or smoke into a sea, walls of water on either side. I think I'm going to think, I bet if I went around, or if I took this route, it would be much safer. So I've been clearly told, follow the Lord, do this, and you will saved. And I was thinking, okay, that's what doubt looks like. Okay, God told me I'd be okay. He promised. He's literally saving me right now, but I'm going to choose to take this trail instead.
Yeah. Is his way best? Is he really good?
Right.
I need to, in a sense, really settle that in my mind ahead of time before the trial, because in the midst of the trial, I will be pressured by, wisdom from below, demonic, to say, maybe my way's better. You go back to Genesis chapter 3, and what is Eve being tempted by Satan? Really, maybe God's not good. Really, maybe your plan that he's putting in her mind is a better plan. Maybe actually you would be better off eating this fruit, or in your illustration, going around the sea rather than through the sea.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a constant temptation of our flesh. And when we're in our way, that is our wisdom, earthly, natural, demonic, it will be reflected in our behavior and in our speech.
And part of the way that God has instructed is a positive use of our words. Just in the same way, last week you talked about a positive use of our actions. So you brought this up a little bit earlier, but if I'm focused on the Lord, okay, what is that going to look like, Brian? Because I don't want to just practice, I'm only going to compliment people today. I'm just going to affirm.
Nor do you want to stay in this completely negative headspace where it's don't do this, speak less, which is missing out on the death and life are in the power of the tongue. I can use
great.
my tongue for life. So, you know, compliment. Well, I mean, I think praise and encouragement is wind in everyone's sails. Most folks know the issues they need to work on pretty much intuitively. We tend to think, especially in our business, that we need to be calling stuff out all the time.
Slash marriages.
Marriage or with your kids even. And the fact is that, and maybe our kids don't know, and they need to be instructed, but when they feel safe, secure, they have the courage to tackle issues. That's true in our families, within our workplaces, and our staff. They feel safe to come to us when they have something that they know they need to work on and they need some input. And so I think it's not just compliment, but it is reinforcing words that reinforce the safety of the relationship. I'm really grateful for our friendship. I really enjoy our friendship. I'm grateful that God's given us a history together and that we know one another. I'm just grateful that we have the ability to talk about really hard and challenging things. And I'm just creating a safety for you in the relationship.
Yeah.
That's part of it. But also, man, yeah, I don't think you can encourage enough. You just feeding that. So encourage, core being the heart. You are speaking into the heart. You're bringing strength into the heart when you are, Amber, I see the gifts in you. I see your clarity and your passion for the gospel. I see your ability to encourage a staff team and align a staff team toward a vision and a mission. I see your creativity and how to help us think about doing things better. I mean, all those things are true. Maybe they're stuck in my mind. Well, why don't I give those gifts to
Right.
you? I just don't think you can give enough of those.
That's a great application.
And I will tell you, that is a muscle that's not necessarily my spiritual gift or natural for me. I learned to exercise that muscle and grow it from my wife.
Yeah.
Because she is just the best. It's intuitive for her. She doesn't have to think about it. She's doing it all the time. You've met her for the first time, and there's something she's looking intuitively for, something she can just encourage you with. And so people walk away feeling like, man, I can
do anything.
I can do anything.
Yes.
Yeah, and
I'm
and I
literally the
watched
greatest
that.
person ever because Tristy just told me.
Exactly. And so I've watched it and I've learned. I'm saying that just because even if you feel like right now you're not great at it, okay, it's a muscle that can be developed. It's in you by the power of the Spirit. Now start exercising it, and you're going to become better at it. It's become more natural and more intuitive.
Right.
I learned that from my wife.
When you talk about intuitive and natural, it's because she is not just approaching a conversation saying, okay, I really need to say something nice and affirming to this person.
Right.
She might, but I'll tell you what, it's going to be a lot more powerful if she is thinking, I love the Lord and I love the work that I see the Lord doing in this person. And if that's what she's affirming, then that is going to make an impact. So,
Yeah, it never feels superficial.
right, absolutely.
And you know what? If you start and it feels a little superficial to you, that's okay. Just practice, and you're going to develop the muscle, and it'll become natural.
That's really good. I've really enjoyed the time that we're spending in this book. Brian, honestly, I'm going to be sad when this series is over because I feel...
But you liked Revelation too, so the next one
was
will
great.
be awesome.
Yes. I think...
Don't fear, Amber.
Okay, fine, I won't. But I just think personally, like I see my life just even, I think of my walk with the Lord even like as a tree. And like right now in this season, I think there's another ring being put around my tree. Like I think that the Lord is using these words, this book of James, I'm just applying it and interpreting it and believing in it in a way that I've never been able to process before. And so I hope that the very same thing is happening for our audience. And if it's not right now, that's great because this stuff is going to be online forever. So in your time, you just watch and you listen. But I do want to thank you, Brian, for
Thanks, Amber.
processing this with me. You've given me just help in applying this, I think, really to my daily life in a way that really did feel a little bit nervous about before. So good job, Teacher Brian.
Proud of you, Amber.
You're doing great. Okay, listeners, thank y'all for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Matt will be back. He misses you all, so can't wait to have that